Welcome back to America 2 Video 3C, the ongoing saga of how excessive population growth continues to impact individual distress symptoms in our society that are currently harming over 160 million of our citizens today and every day. Symptom number 5, falling living standards and being forced to incur debt for everyday subsistence purchases like food. The overall pie that represents America's economy is being divided up each year amongst a population that's already unsustainable over the long term and growing larger each day, both in legal and illegal citizens, while the economy itself is stuck in the past at 1957 levels. That means that in real terms, each citizen's slice of the pie has been getting proportionally smaller every year since 1957. In 1957, the average worker in the productive sector of the economy earned enough to pay all the bills for a family of 4 each month out of after-tax earnings, including saving up enough to make the down payment on a 3-bedroom home, paying all expenses related to owning the home like principal and interest on a mortgage, insurance, utilities, property taxes, maintenance, and so forth, food, clothing, transportation, medical expenses, educational expenses, paying for a 2-week vacation each year in cash, and still put aside about 5% in a rainy day account or to provide some extra income at retirement time. Now we're forward to 2024, and the average family can't ever save up enough for a 3-bedroom home, and don't bring in enough, and after taxes of all kinds are taken out to make the required payments that would represent a mortgage amount even if the down payment could be met. The majority of Americans are now being asked by their government to accept less in every area than was available to everyone in 1957. Paychecks don't stretch as far as they used to. People rent houses, condos, or apartments rather than buying a home. People lease cars rather than buying them. They live in houses that are not theirs. They drive cars that belong to a bank or some finance company. They use credit cards to allow them to meet expenses between paychecks when their take-home pay runs out before the end of the month arrives. And they do without things that in prior years they could have and would have bought out of their cash reserves. Our government attempts to treat these negative advances in our society by providing more and more inflated dollars to the money changers so that the money changers can then loan it to the citizens and businesses who, after the loan payments start coming due, now have even less in spendable income available than they had before the money changers, before they took out the loans, while the money changers become more wealthy as each day passes. The businesses can raise their prices to offset the price increases and interest increases on their loans. The citizens cannot increase their paychecks enough to offset both the increased prices and interest they pay to buy things at the higher prices. The American standard of living that we enjoyed in 1957 has been replaced for a significant and growing minority of citizens with a standard of never-ending debt that the average American lives with today, often for life, promoted by the money changers and their servants and the government. And the end result is that as the population has grown beyond our nation's carrying capacity, the ever thinner pieces of a pie, our economy, that has not grown in size at all since 1957, has resulted in the serious devaluation and lowering of what used to be the average standard of living for American families. Symptom number 6, government complicity in destroying jobs and lives here in America by way of one-sided trade agreements, government-sanctioned job relocations outside the United States, and endorsement and support of job-killing mergers between already gigantic enterprises. This one's almost self-explanatory. The government has engaged in each of these damaging activities every day and every year over the past 40 to 50 years at least. The severity of the consequences in each case has been magnified by increasingly unsupportable population growth in both legal and illegal citizens. Symptom number 7, persistent levels of violent crime, including mass shootings of innocent children and adult citizens. As in symptom number 6 previously, the rise in crime and senseless mass murders has expanded proportionally as the nation's population expanded beyond the nation's carrying capacity and ultimately reached a point where not all citizens could have access to a job that provided a decent standard of living. Population is now expanded to a point where the number of people who have been disenfranchised, marginalized, and reached their breaking point when trying to work inside the system have given up and decided that the best path for them is a path outside the law. And they take that path, no matter who gets hurt along the way. Our overloaded jails and prisons speak to these symptoms of a society in decline, but not ever in a way that results in making the symptoms less, let alone making them go away altogether. Symptom number 8, increased crime relating to trafficking and controlled substances, drugs and narcotics. As our population has increased beyond the point where employers can offer a decent job to everyone needing one, a proportional increase in the number of citizens seeking solace in mind-altering drugs has followed. This one's also a no-brainer. What exactly did the government expect would happen as they disassembled our once robust national economy, in the process turning millions of hardworking and law-abiding citizens out into the streets to satisfy the commercial interests and the money changers? Symptom number 9, increased instances of unwarranted police brutality against unarmed citizens. This one too is pretty much self-explanatory. As the population continued to grow and government at the same time tried to control proportionally growing crime levels, it implemented many areas that encroached on citizens' privacy and their ability to live their lives as they chose, including maybe smoking a joint once in a while. The increased crime relating to making and selling mind-altering drugs in general expanded with the population in general, beyond the ability of many police forces to keep it in check. Police departments were charged with expanding to meet the increased levels of drug and other related crimes, while at the same time the population growth overall was making it harder and harder for many citizens to make a living wage, and the citizens' willingness to keep paying for more municipal bonded indebtedness that typically was used to expand police activities was getting more strained. and police departments were often asked to do more with less on a daily basis. When the police departments sent their officers out onto the streets, they were met increasingly frequently with individuals on drugs, sometimes whole gangs on drugs, and found themselves confronted ever more occasions where their lives were in danger, and they shot first and asked questions later to make sure they got home, to go home after work. Of course, there are occurrences where the transgressions by police officers are egregious and where officers need to pay for their actions against an unarmed person they claim they're trying to place under arrest. The bad ones certainly must be weeded out and, when needed, sent to prison to pay for their crimes, which is what would happen to average citizens under similar circumstances. But considering the total number of times each day that police officers are asked to make these kinds of often split-second decisions, the overall number of such occurrences nationwide are remarkably few. We all need to keep in mind that the more times any one officer is placed in these circumstances, the more likely it is that at least one such confrontation will end in someone dying. The culprit is increasingly often population expansion's downstream effects, adversely affecting one of our most important institutions, our men and women in blue, who protect and serve their communities. We need to rebuild our economy so that the number of citizens driven to earn their living outside the law goes way down. And at the same time, cities can afford to hire enough police officers and pay their police officers commensurate with the protective services they provide. And in order to do that, we will need to rebuild our economy to a point where these things are not just possible, but probable. Or better yet, certain. And in order to do that, we'll need to bring supply and demand into balance in terms of how many people there are that need good jobs and how many good jobs have been created to employ them. That should be all that would be required to both reduce deadly confrontations between police and desperate citizens and get our economy moving forward again from where it's stuck now at 1957 levels. Symptom number 10. Increasing numbers of single-parent families where children are mostly raised by caregivers as opposed to being raised by their parents. Between 1975 and 2005, the government aided the commercial interests, mostly manufacturing companies, in relocating their production operations to other countries. The commercial interests wanted to relocate to avoid having to pay taxes of any kind, and also to avoid having to pay worker benefits of any kind, in the process doubling their after-tax profits. The government wanted to curry favor with the commercial interests so as to assure they stayed employed as servants of the people. And the commercial interests provided the money they needed to get and stay elected. In Italy during the Roman Empire, this kind of arrangement was called or was known as a quid pro quo. Because of this particular quid pro quo, almost 47 million workers in America lost their jobs over a 30-year period of time. Because there were almost no new jobs created to employ the displaced manufacturing workers and the support workers and the retail and wholesale workers affected by these job relocations to other countries. Family incomes are those still having at least one adult in a married couple still employed at some level fell dramatically. The government tossed these people a crumb in the way of some sort or sorts of welfare payments. The welfare payments added to the amounts the government had to extract from the shrinking remaining number of citizens who were still employed and paying taxes, which turns out to be less than half of the income receiving population in our country. The catch was that over those 30 years' time, and continuing until now, the nation's population continued to grow at a much faster rate than jobs at any level were coming online. And further, the jobs being created were mostly in service type jobs, that the ones that lost their job in the manufacturing sector were not well equipped to fill. And the service jobs typically didn't pay as well as the lost manufacturing jobs had previously paid. And topping it off, some of the jobs created went to machines, automation. It was a perfect storm economic collision for millions of lower and mid-level income families in America. More people needing jobs versus fewer jobs per capita being created, and an ongoing population growth making the situation worse every day. To meet these challenges, many families chose to have either the father or mother divorce themselves from the family unit, which allowed whichever family member remained behind to get additional welfare payments from the government, taxpayers. The effect on children were for the most negative and long-lasting. A disproportionate number of children in foster care, reform schools, living on the streets, living in prisons, have been and continue to be from homes having a single adult caretaker or parent for the children. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and thanks for caring about our country and wanting to see it, America, and us be all we can be together.